Hi, so today I just want to dive a little bit into how I believe that we as Americans should commemorate and celebrate the 250th anniversary of the American Revolution. And specifically, I want to talk about how I think that there should be spotlight shined on marginalized communities and especially Native Americans who didn't have the opportunity to celebrate the revolution ending when it happened or really in years to come. So, just to start off with a little bit of a history, according to historian James Merrill, there were no celebrations in Native communities across America upon the hearing of the conclusion of the American Revolution. When I read that, I immediately was thinking to myself, well, it's kind of obvious what is there to celebrate. Um, but then it caused me to think deeper into what could have made Native Americans want to commit to the British cause or what could have made them want to side with Americans. And I think there was a lot of appeal to Native loyalists. Um, it's really unfortunate because they were just once again betrayed by the white men, whoever did decide to give their commitment to the British cause. The reasons that I found, it could have varied from fear of colonization, greater colonization, besides what's already been. They could have really feared for greater expansion westward. I think that's a very valid fear because it did end up occurring. There were treaties that had been established in Appalachia specifically, that prohibited the expansion westward by the British. So I think they did have a trust in that. And they also found that through that, the British had more want for their sovereignty more than the Americans at that point were showing. So yeah, I think there's a lot of reasons that could have varied as to why. I think manipulation also, they could have also just been more familiar with the British. Furthermore, the Iroquois Confederacy was a prominent group during the Revolution. And like I said, there were some sides that did choose to side and show their support for the American cause. But there were a majority who did side with the British. And the British, it was a very symbiotic relationship. The British really needed that guerrilla warfare and those tactics that the American colonists had feared for so much. Because if there's one thing I think the American colonists feared more than the British, it was the Native Americans, which we saw after the war. They could have had the war on Native Americans a long time ago if they really wanted to, which I think I will kind of hit on that a little later because James Merrill says something that kind of, I really find that it's a falsehood, but regardless, they still had their land taken and they still are a marginalized community to this day. So I think that there is something to be said about why they were so fearful of the natives versus the British or natives that were showing British support. It's very interesting. But so yeah, I'm going to jump ahead and because I kind of confused myself a little bit with back to this James Merrill. There is a quote that he said that natives were on the brink of extinction that I find really interesting because that's often weaved throughout history. I know that I myself have been told that in classes, and I took a class a few years ago that really opened my eyes on that narrative, basically. And I feel like to acknowledge Native Americans as an artifact or an antiquity, instead of a dynamic static group of people that are evolving and acclimating into society just as much as a colonist, I think that's dangerous and it contributes to this narrative that's the erasure of indigenousness. There's multiple projects throughout the years, specifically of photographers going into Native communities, and you see a lot of regalia worn and things like that, but it's not accurate portrayals. And so I think that also contributes to that narrative of natives were stuck in the past and not continuing to evolve and grow. And it's very dangerous. And so I don't think that natives were ever on the brink of extinction. But I do think that their culture was demonized, and the Americans wanted natives, they wanted them extinct. They wanted it to be extinct, their culture, and for them to go away and cast them onto reservations and them not to be dealt with, to deal with quote unquote the Indian problem once and for all. But you can't do that to a group of people that is very, that has culture, that has kinship with the land. It's really harmful. And so that leads me all to this bigger question of how do we celebrate and how do we commemorate the 250th anniversary with this in mind? Because we're celebrating breaking away from one group of people that is oppressing us to going on to oppressing another group of people for the next, what, how 250 years. So it's very interesting to me. And I think that primarily it should start with commemorating Native Americans whose voices were lost and allowing Native communities to have this space to reclaim and this space for them to celebrate. And putting that at the forefront and the focus. And what does that look like? I don't think that me as a non-native white girl really truly knows, but I think that it should be celebrated. There is a lot of controversy. It brings me to my next point, with Colleen Shogan, who is, she is right now in charge of the National Archives and Records, and the Wall Street Journal a few months ago reported that she had censored numerous displays at the museum in an effort to, quote-unquote, de-emphasize negative parts of U.S. history, according to documents. And so I think that in and of itself is really interesting, because this erasure at a time when we can be pushing forward these stories that have long been not celebrated and talked about, I think it's really dangerous. And so I want to reiterate that we should not shy away from the negatives. We should not shy away from the fact that we did push Native Americans onto allotted land eventually, and that their treaties were nulled and voided and had no skin in the game. I do think that we should talk about that, because it goes to show, how do we fix that? What did we do to reprimand that? Have we ever reprimanded that? And if we haven't, is it too late to begin? Can we begin by shedding light on what we have done and what past administrations have done and haven't done? And so that, I think, is really important. And I think that there are a lot of museums, and I think it could even go as far as people my age use social media. We love social media. We use TikTok, we use X, formerly known as Twitter, we use Instagram. I think that the Library of Congress, I think that the White House, I think that all major branches and everything that has PR team could really, we all use social media. I think that we should celebrate by releasing documentaries, by releasing interviews, TED Talks, by focusing and shining light on these voices that haven't had the opportunity to be in the spotlight or really be heard in the past. Primarily Native Americans, specifically only Native Americans, when it comes to their past and how we should commemorate them. I can go outside and probably find at least 5 American flags in a 25-mile radius. To me, people celebrate our independence every single day. I don't think that Native Americans had that opportunity, as they are still so marginalized, and they are still so regulated, and their communities are so regulated by the American government, and there is still so much surveillance and oversight over their ways of living. So I think by focusing and celebrating their history, their contributions to the war efforts, that is how we celebrate true American history. That by not shying away from these negatives, because it's terrible that we did completely basically lie to groups of people to get what we wanted at times and gain certain supports and throw off certain support. But in the end, how have we came together as American people and loving our neighbors? And I think that's what's most important, especially at a time that is so polarizing in America today. And so, yeah, I hope that I was able to kind of shed some light on how I think that Native Americans and specifically Native American loyalist can be talked about and have information shared about them during the time of the 250th anniversary and the spotlight shined. I think it's really important, and I think that shying away and not telling the harsh sides of American history, and especially having to do with the American Revolution, is just dangerous, and it will not serve us in the end. So I hope that by the time we are celebrating, that there can be something done and I can turn on my television and that I can see a documentary about Native Americans' involvement in the American Revolution rather than just another one on the French. Thank you and have a great day.